Hi, everyone. So we'll just give a minute or so to let everyone get on the call. As people are joining us, though, if you would like to just go into the chat and share with us where you're coming from today. Hey, just for the to be mindful of time, I'll get going. Welcome, everyone. My name is Peyton Bailey, and I will be the moderator today. I am a member of Health Promotion Ontario's Professional Development Subcommittee, and we are thrilled to have you join us for Health Promotion Ontario's 2023 webinar series, Health Promotion in a New Era. So today we are excited to kick off our third and final session, Advocacy When Passion Becomes Policy. We'd like to start today's webinar by acknowledging the traditional lands on which we are situated. Today, I am joining virtually with you from Toronto, Ontario, but I encourage you to join me in acknowledgement from wherever you are joining us. I respectfully acknowledge the land I'm meeting you from is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis. This session is made possible by our Professional Development Subcommittee, the Ontario Public Health Association, and of course, Health Promotion Ontario. As the voice of health promotion across the province, HPO seeks to advance the importance of health promotion through professional development, member communication, and of course, advocacy. I encourage you to consider becoming a member today. So first, I just want to go through a few housekeeping items. Please note this session is being recorded and it will be available on the HPO website later this month for your convenience. We want this webinar to be as interactive as possible. Therefore, we encourage you to participate in discussions using the chat function, which many of you already have. And if you have any questions, we encourage you to use the Q&A function on Zoom. So any questions for the panelists today, please use the Q&A function on the bottom of your Zoom screen. Our session today will be structured into 3 sections. The first are some brief presentations from our speakers. Second will be a panelist discussion with some prepared questions. And lastly, we will have our Q&A using questions from you, the audience. So I'm very excited. Joining us today are 3 distinct speakers. We have Dr. Gary Block, Rob Johannes, and Ariana Prom. Rob Johannes works in health promotion and policy development with Fred Victor, a leading homelessness nonprofit in Toronto. Rob co-chairs the St. Jamestown Service Providers Network and sits on numerous boards of directors, including the Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness and Executive Committee of Health Promotion Ontario. He is an adjunct professor at both the Factor Invitash Faculty of Social Work at the University of Toronto and York University's School of Social Work. He was executive director of the Vancouver Area Network of Drug Users, who spearheaded the opening of North America's supervised injection facility and worked on several successful Supreme Court challenges. Sometimes called Toronto Bono, Rob has been the lead vocalist of the acclaimed rock band Paint and has a new musical project, A Question of When, in development with the Ontario Arts Council funded record coming in 2023. Rob works with Bono's One campaign on women's rights and ending extreme poverty internationally. Gary Block came into family medicine with a desire to use healthcare as a space to affect social change for individuals and communities. He's still trying, along with raising 3 children, 3 cats, and holding on to the pretense that he will one day learn to play guitar. He's most inspired by his work with lived experience experts who consistently turn his ideas upside down and blow his mind. And lastly, but certainly not least, we have Ariana Prom. Ariana Prom is 17 years old and passionate about personal growth and connecting with others. Ariana's experience with mental health at Youth Wellness Hubs Ontario inspired them to prioritize their emotional well-being. Ariana is interested in studying social issues, including mental health and politics, and believes that understanding their intersection is crucial to affecting positive change. Whether they are working on themselves or working to improve their community through the Wellness Hub, Ariana always strives to make a positive impact. Okay, well, certainly excited to have the 3 of you joining us today. So we will get started with some videos, beginning with Rob Johannes.
Good day, everyone. My name is Rob Johannes. I work in health promotions with Fred Victor in Toronto. I co-chair the Service Providers Network in St. Jamestown, and I'm also the Executive Secretary of Health Promotion Ontario. So thank you all for being here today. I'm going to be here to talk about how we do systems change from a health promotions lens. And a lot of you probably get this question as health promoters. What exactly do you do? I used to joke and say, well, we're not like Hal and Joanne going around encouraging everyone to keep fit and have fun, but I think we kind of are. We're looking at not just individual health, physical health, mental health, but community health. And if we're not having fun doing it, then I think we're kind of missing the point. So we keep our ears to the ground and we respond to issues in creative ways. Essentially, what we do is be Batman. So in this instance, we're talking about St. Jamestown. Beautiful, beautiful city there. It's the most densely populated and ethnically diverse neighborhood in the country. It has also been identified as an economically deprived neighborhood. By contrast, the density and languages spoken have resulted in a high amount of community engagement, as including a service providers network, which is made up of 45 different organizations, some of whose logos are shown here, and is now in its 25th year of operation. You may have heard about St. Jamestown in the news. Massive fire at 650 Parliament Street that led to 1,500 people being displaced from their housing, and other major incidents. Building fire, not just the building fires, but power outages and floods, one building after another. And that led us to have to re-examine the concept of critical incident, because the city's crisis response program just says shooting, stabbings, and assaults. And we were asking, well, what about when there's a fire in a building? What about an electrical outage? What about an earthquake? What about, in this situation, a pandemic? Death by suicide, an overdose. This affects a huge community. What if it's police violence? So we ended up working with a bunch of different partners and rewriting a neighborhood community crisis response protocol that then also did an inventory of who are the community ambassadors, where are the doctors, where are the social workers, or when these things happen on Friday night at 9 o'clock when none of us are there. We then had to look at respite locations so people don't have to sit on TTC buses when something happens, and just did an inventory of all the different resources that exist in the community. The question then came up of, why isn't St. Jamestown a neighborhood improvement area under the Toronto Strong Neighborhood Strategy, whereby key need communities were prioritized for community development funding, given a designated officer with the city. St. Jamestown had missed that threshold by less than half of a point. So we worked with our health access team and put together a report summarizing various indicators of health beyond just what was included in the evaluation criteria. We looked at income, we looked at all kinds of social determinants of health factors, and then we coupled that report with a petition that we launched online as well as in person. Worked with the media team to create infographics, and then we launched the petition at the spring gathering, which is a community consultation where a couple hundred community members, this is pre-pandemic, are in a gymnasium talking about issues that matter to them. And then all of the feedback from those discussions goes back into our strategic planning for the next year. So it's a very bottom-up process. I announced the petition in front of this audience, and I invited the school board trustee, the member of provincial parliament, the city councilor, all to come up and be the first people to sign it. And if you're an elected representative, that's a great photo opportunity. So that helped launch us into existence. We also then had a training by the national treasurer, Olivia Chow, on how to tell your story and then how to deliver a deputation for the Economic and Community Development Committee. And this was offered free of charge because Olivia used to live in St. Jamestown. This is work that's done through her organization called the Institute for Change Leaders, where I am also a coach. The day before the motion went to the table for City Council, we got top story on the CBC News, print and television. There's me looking very impressed to be engaging with media. We ended up with over 1,200 signatures, and more of them were online because more of them were in person, because that's just the nature of the community and different access to technology. And it is a very analog face-to-face community. So you need to get to know the communities that you're working with and what's going to work best for them. We also collected by request about 20 letters of support from CEOs of all the different organizations within the network, and elected representatives also signed on to that. When we turned it over to the Ward 13 office, there's me looking very impressed again. They also promoted it through their avenues. So with all of that momentum happening, the members' motion went up in front of City Council by Councillor Wong Tam at the time, and seconded by Councillor Mike Layton. It was approved unanimously, which, if you're familiar with the makeup of Toronto City Council, that is unheard of for something to be approved unanimously. So what's happening now is that the entire strong neighborhood strategy is being reconsidered and reevaluated. What criteria do we take into consideration when making these determinations? And a lot of the factors that are being considered are a direct result of the report that we submitted. We are now waiting for the next strong neighborhood announcement to be rolled out, and we have very high hopes that St. Jamestown is going to be included. I'd love to chat about these issues. It's what we do as health promoters. We talk about really big things and how to turn them into reality. So please feel free to reach out to me. And thank you so much for having me here today.
Okay, thank you, Rob. And next up is Dr. Gary Block.
Thank you so much for having me here. It's such a pleasure to have the opportunity to speak with you about a topic that I'm truly passionate about, which is advocacy. I became involved in advocacy really before I came into medicine. I came into medicine largely to find a way to pair my interest in advocacy with the ability to engage in frontline work with people on a day-to-day basis. Like many people, when I was in school, I was sort of interested in advocating on all sorts of issues, always looking for ways to kind of support and bring about and advance ideas of social change. As I came out of medical school, I realized that I would need to focus more. And, by a bit of a stroke of luck or happenstance, kind of got caught into advocacy around poverty and raising social assistance rates. Um, and got pulled into a really interesting campaign that was focused on a specific area of social assistance, something called the Special Diet Program, where we were able to engage in a direct action that involved supporting people living on social assistance to access actual extra funds to support their lives through the Special Diet Program. Now, I mean, that's a whole story in itself. I'm not going to go into that, but the sort of impact and success of that campaign really reinforced to me the idea that advocacy could and should remain a central part of my professional life and my conception of my role as a physician. I gotta say though, when I was trained into being an advocate by mentors of mine, by people, role models, people I looked up to, I really was trained into a concept of advocacy that put the physician or the health provider voice at the center of that advocacy. Really with the idea that we should do our best to use our power and our privilege in kind of quote unquote good ways. And this is a notion of advocacy that I think is still very prevalent within the physician community, especially, right? The idea that we need to speak for those who are voiceless or who have less powerful voices than our own. This idea that we should, to some degree recognize our privilege, but really leverage that privilege to amplify ideas that we think need to be amplified. This concept has been built into, I think, in many ways, the center of our understanding of advocacy as physicians. I mean, there's even a very well-recognized framework for what we call competencies for physicians, called the CanMEDS framework, which really puts advocacy as one of its kind of main pillars of physician competencies. And even in there, I'd say that the conception of advocacy is a little confused. I think it does still rest on this idea of amplifying voices. But really a lot of people just don't know what to do with that beyond the idea of kind of putting themselves out there to speak for others. So I want to speak to a project that I've been involved in over the last couple of years called the ACE-PHC project, or Advocacy and Community Engagement with Primary Healthcare project. And this is a piece of work that's really trying to shift our understanding in the health community or the primary care community of what advocacy is. I'll tell you, I mean, the project itself represents a bit of a breakthrough in the sense that it was funded with a fairly significant grant from the Foundation for Advancing Family Medicine, which is really the kind of fund holding arm of the College of Family Physicians of Canada. And it's a project that really emerged from the conditions of the pandemic, specifically from the increased awareness of health inequities, increased awareness of the impact on specific communities of a major health outbreak like COVID, and of the need to look, or a deeper understanding of the need to look towards structural and social change if we really want to prevent the types of inequities that we saw play out during the pandemic from occurring again. And I think all of that has led to an understanding that we really need to look towards a much stronger community voice in our work towards social change. So through this the ACE-PHC project, we really set out to support direct advocacy, and specifically direct advocacy by communities, not by health providers, but also set out to quite explicitly shift our understanding of what advocacy in the healthcare world is. So, as a core principle, uh, we wanted to go out and support community leadership and advocacy. And what we were able to do is actually use our funding to support 3 community-led advocacy initiatives, uh, and study them, and study them to really try and understand what are the fundamental principles of community leadership in advocacy that in some ways involves healthcare providers. So the projects we supported, there were 3 across the country. One was in the Toronto area and West Scarborough, which looked at decent work. There was a project in Alberta, in Edmonton and Calgary, that was looking, or that was supporting a group led by people who use substances, and a project in BC that was supporting a large advocacy coalition focused on family and child poverty. These are 3 very different projects with very different approaches, very different structures, very different conceptions of advocacy within themselves. But at their core, all of them were and are led by very powerful groups of people with lived experience, people grounded in the communities that they're working with and advocating for. Now, we really, as sort of the kind of what we call, I guess, principal investigators or project leaders, really just sit back and let these projects play out. We offered up some supports around, developing approaches to advocacy or community engagement. Quite honestly, the groups involved were not particularly interested in those supports because they all had very powerful experience in these areas already. And then we conducted our evaluation. And I can tell you that some of the core themes emerging from this are really important and really, I think, quite powerful for thinking about what our understanding of advocacy should be moving forward, and specifically advocacy that involves leadership by communities. So first of all, we heard over and over again about the need for longitudinal relationships between partners involved in advocacy to be built over a significant time. And that any attempt at effective advocacy involving community leadership needs to be built from a deep understanding of communities and their internal dynamics and specific community needs. And finally, that any attempt to engage in community-led advocacy needs to start from a recognition and explicit discussions of power and privilege in the dynamics within the groups involved in this advocacy, and specifically in the dynamics involving these healthcare providers. So, again, we're just starting into understanding what the lessons learned from this advocacy are, but if I were to carry one piece forward into my future work and into my future involvement in advocacy, I think it really will focus on the need to broaden our understanding of advocacy from simply using power and privilege to amplify a position towards working with communities, and in fact, working for communities to understand what is needed slowly and iteratively in complex social change environments, and to at every step take our cues and take leadership from the communities that we're working with. And if we are able to assimilate this type of understanding of advocacy into our future understanding of what advocacy should be, what that competency of advocacy should look like within the healthcare world, I think we will see a fundamental shift in both our effectiveness as advocates and our relationships with the communities that we are working with as healthcare providers. So I'll leave it there and look forward to your thoughts in the conversation.
Okay. Thank you, Gary, for that. And lastly, we have Ariana Prom from Youth Wellness Hubs Ontario.
So I work for the Windsor Essex Youth Wellness Hub, and the hub is connected to the Youth Wellness Hub of Ontario, and it's also known as YHU. So YHU is all about finding the right services and the right time and the right place to connect with youth. And right services means like tailoring everything so it fits the proper needs of what the youth in that community specifically needs. And the right place really means having outreach not only within urban areas like Toronto, but also suburban areas with Chatham and, like I said, Windsor. So the YHU also aims to improve access and outcomes to services for young people in between the ages of 12 and 15. We really do this through co-developing and using the community to help build the hubs up. We also use something called the Youth Advisory Council, also known as the YAC, to have input and help have outreach within the community. It's also really important that we have the YAC within YHU to connect with many youth and to have services provided that can aim to help everyone. So what I'm going to talk a little bit about today is awareness to action and some different advocacy methods and how they have applied through the Youth Wellness Hub. So a little bit about me is I am 17 years old and I have been in the mental health world for about 7 years. And I came through this by being diagnosed with depression and anxiety. So I have a lot of experience of knowing what it's like to go through the mental health system and different services that they offer. That's how I kind of got intrigued with social issues and obviously more specifically mental health. So that's what really drew me to the Youth Wellness Hub. And on the hub, like I said, I'm on the Youth Advisory Council, and the purpose of the council is to bring input from a youth experience and to help tailor the hub and get a broader reach of what we need in the community. Some things we have done is we recently got an equity grant, and we are really targeting that grant to be used on harm reduction. Some other things we have done is we have also made connections through schools and been developing the hub building by making sure it's accessible, and we have also been trying to make ways on promoting it. The main project I'm going to talk about is the EDI strategic plan that we are going to create, and the plan is for helping uh, create equity, diversity, and inclusion within the hub and with families in Windsor in general. So the purpose of why we have a strategic planning is for EDI, we noticed there has been some gaps within the hub. We did this because we recognize that we need to have these conversations. The YAC has also helped to improve within the council by we recently had a hiring from a multicultural perspectives. We have also been aiming for education on EDI and for staff at the hub. This is why we made a 3-year plan for achieving this, and in this plan, we made it a goal to form an EDI committee and have programs tailored to minority groups. Another part of the plan is to have equity and inclusion with families in Windsor. This is an important thing to us because we know like new migrants adapting to Canada can be difficult sometimes, and we also want to help work through any cultural issues they might have. To achieve this, we have created different ways to help advocate for these programs. And some of these types of advocacies that we wouldn't normally typically use is working together with cultural communities and centers and having schools with diverse population be a part of the wellness hub and having their input. It's really important for the Youth Advisory Council to continue to be part of this because we feel like we need to have representation and to have an outsider's perspective. This can help relate to other problems or troubles that we may not personally relate to. Like, for example, I'm Asian, and I know there's not really a willingness to talk about mental health, and there's a very big priority on school. And most of the time, your mental health and well-being is pushed aside. So it's like very important to focus to advocate that school shouldn't always be your first priority. And if it's detrimental to your health, this kind of information can really help form surveys and gather data on where the gaps are in the community. Knowing this can help build programs based around the data, and also having more people at the hub that can relate to those cultural experiences can help more people feel included and feel like their voices are heard. Some challenge we expect to have are different cultural beliefs. To help relieve this, we are making information more available and teaching about the benefits of helping improve mental well-being. Another challenge that we might see coming is socioeconomic differences and accessibility. So to combat this, when we advocate on social media in schools, we make sure to make it known that there is no financial cost to our services and that there's no shame in coming to get these services. Also, another challenge that we have seen, not specifically in EDI, but in general, is the stigma against mental health or just asking for help. So what we really try to do is normalize talking and speaking out about our problems that we may be facing, and really trying to promote like a positive message. Also, considering EDI, the lack of representation is another challenge we are trying to face. And to do this, like I said, we have recently hired more diverse perspectives within the YAC committee. This has led us to focus on youth engagement as well. Advocacy through, oh, my bad. For many teenagers, the stigma surrounding mental health is still there, despite how many people have mental health issues and the growing advocacy and understanding of mental health. Many of us are really unwilling or unable to acknowledge that there are difficulties. The reasons are different for everyone. The most common one is the willingness to address the problem or even acknowledge its existence. Another issue is facing pressure from school and even our friends in general, or the people that are surrounded by us, because even though we know we have mental health issues, and we want to help solve it, there's still a pressure from everyone around us, even ourselves, to just go push through it and succeed no matter what. This can lead to us like burning out and really struggling with school. Another reason that people might not think of is some of us have already even tried to help fix our mental health issues, but since we already went through the system and it hasn't worked out for us, sometimes it can be very discouraging to go back and ask for help again. For example, I experienced this when I was about 14, and when I was in the mental health system, it was very tiring to hear the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. So I think that's why some people and some youth don't try to address it, because they have already been through that, so they don't feel like it's going to work again for them. So to address these issues, it's good to provide a variety of methods and programs for addressing mental health concerns. This can include traditional approaches like therapy and medication, as well as some alternative approaches like mindful practices and just support from people around you. It's also important to ensure mental health services are accessible and affordable. This can be a very driving factor of also why people don't go and get it, because they don't have access, or maybe their family is looked down upon, so they can't get the help they need. So this is some reasons why youth are very hesitant when it comes to mental health, even though there's a lot of advocacy involving mental health. So a way for advocacy through social media in some ways to make it more effective is that one of the biggest reasons is to keep it simple. And to keep it simple doesn't really mean to remove all the information. It just really means to remove it from the post or the picture they're seeing. You can put it through your bio or through the caption, but it's very important to remove it from the actual photo and just get it straight to the point. And this is more because of how people can be very overwhelmed with information, and some people might be interested if they don't really know what the main goal is. Another thing you can do is to make it more aesthetically pleasing. This can really help grab people's attention and help you stand out from other organizations that might be doing different types of advocacy. Another way you can also improve social media skills for advocacy is promoting incentives and making sure it's known that if you do have free services that you market towards them, because this can really help you stand out from other organizations and really have people drawn to your organization, because my other places might not be doing what you're doing. And finally, just to summarize everything, EDI is a very important issue to address, and some things you can do is just talking to your friends and making sure you have these conversations, and not only prioritizing the people around you, but the people on that you may not relate to. And regarding advocacy, there are different methods and ways that can all be effective, but it's important that you know who your demographic is, and that's how you'll be the most effective with your ways. And in my personal opinion, I think the most effective is social media, because just of how big of an impact it has on everyone and how it can spread your message. And thank you for listening.
Okay, thank you very much to our three panelists for providing those pre-recorded videos. I'm sure the audience shares my feelings of inspiration after those, and I'm really excited to transition into our panel discussion at this stage. So the panelist discussion is really an opportunity for panelists to share their insight and discuss ideas. Guiding this discussion are some prepared questions, including a few that were provided during audience registration. And I'd also like to take a moment. We already have a bunch of questions posted to the Q&A function below, but if you do have any questions for a specific attendee, specific panelist, or just anybody to spark a discussion, I encourage you to post those to the Q&A function now. Okay. And just to get us warmed up, great to see the three of you here with us today. I'm going to ask a pretty, maybe seemingly straightforward question, but after watching your pre-recorded videos, I think it certainly is evident that advocacy can take on a lot of different forms. So would you be able to share with me, what does advocacy mean to you? And anyone can start this discussion.
I can jump in on that first. I think advocacy is, as it's probably quite apparent, it takes many forms. But ultimately what it is it's creative use of whatever resources you have available to you to advance some kind of change that will positively impact, your life, the life of your community, or those that you're advocating on behalf of or along with. So if that sounds a little textbook and short, but I think it's really making the best of what you have around you and turning those things into superpowers.
Yeah, and to me, it really means about educating and like the different levels it can take. So there's education, while some people go to schools and educate about different topics they're interested. And then obviously, like I talked about, some people do social media. So it really depends on like what you're comfortable doing and how you want to perform your message. And it's really about just kind of what do you want it to be and how you want to change, inform other people's opinion about your topic and educate everyone else.
And I think all I would add, and again, I think there's no accepted definition of advocacy I've ever come across. In fact, it's hotly debated all over the place. I mean, for me, advocacy is really about looking to changing systems and social structures and community structures, you know, in order to address the needs of specific communities or groups of individuals. I mean, the form that takes is almost, or potential forms are almost endless, really.
So it certainly seems like advocacy can take on many forms and really have a lot of different goals. In your view, what are some of the important skills or competencies you think are needed to really be an effective advocate?
A lot of patience, iron will. I took a workshop years ago about the methodology and strategies of Dr. Martin Luther King. And it was really interesting to learn that, we tend to romanticize the excitement that our activist forefathers' lives probably were, because we just imagine them, on the front lines protesting every day and being met with, fire hoses and things like that. But what I learned was that for every one major success that we hear about, like the Montgomery bus strike or things like this, there were another 20 that kind of didn't go anywhere, or they at least helped to inform and build momentum towards the one that became very successful. Their day-to-day was actually quite mundane, a lot like what ours is now. So I think that was really reassuring to be like, okay, we're doing the right thing. Okay, today we're having this meeting with this group. Today we're talking to the print shop that can make signs for us. Today we're discussing policy with somebody in this department. It may not seem as instant as we hope it is, but the key is to have your mountaintop with your big goal and then set a bunch of nested goals on the way towards the mountaintop, which give you checkpoints to say, okay, we've done this. What did we learn? What could we have done differently? Let's celebrate as well, because we need to do some of that. And let's ensure that we're still heading towards where we need to go. And we have to recognize that some changes may happen this month, this year. But when we're talking about big social determinants of health and anti-oppression and equity issues, this is a marathon that we've inherited from our activist elders, and we take what they've given us and we run with it and contribute what we can, and then we pass it on to the Arianas of the world who then continue to run with it and approach it in a more enlightened way. So I think just having that perspective of these are things that may not happen in our lifetime, but we are part of a much larger process of progress.
Yeah, and another skill I think is really important is educating not only self, because that's very important, but that helps evolve to help educate other people. And a lot of times people kind of just look at the main idea and just run with it, but they don't look on the different factors on how we got there. So that can help like introduce different ways of approaching other people on how to get your message more clearly and more effectively. And another thing I would say is being very open-minded to people who may think differently of you, because it's very important to if you see a brick wall, you don't go run into it at full force. You kind of wait and look back and see like how can I change the situation or how can I improve it. You don't. You need to stay calm. Is a very important thing too.
I so wish I had that perspective on advocacy when I was 17, Ariana. I can't even tell you what it saved me a lot of turmoil and heartbreak. So I think what I've learned in the many years and decades since then really just echoes what both of you are saying. But the kinds of words that come to mind are flexibility, creativity, an ability to listen, an ability to kind of suppress ego, which I think is actually one of the hardest things for many people who set out to do advocacy to do. And that means a couple of things. That means, first of all, a willingness not to be at the center of attention and in the spotlight all the time. It also means an ability to see where you're wrong, right? And to shift course and see where you've made mistakes and admit to those, and then move on from it, right? And kind of learn from that. And just to again reiterate what Rob's saying about the need to take like this very long-term view of what we're doing. And I think it took me a very long time to understand that. That you can celebrate incremental change, but you always have to keep an eye on the big change. And that takes real fortitude, right? It takes a real willingness to just kind of stick with it through ups and downs, and sometimes more downs than ups. And again, that thing about listening, I think has to more and more, I think I spoke to that in my video, that it has to be at the core of what we do, that you listen and listen and listen long before you act, and you may never act, you may just support others to act.
This might be jumping ahead to some other questions that we have, but even along that line, I think creativity is a huge part of doing advocacy. I've had a parallel career as a musician my whole life, and I feel like those are just really two different ways of communicating very similar ideas. And we need more of that in health and advocacy and human resources and all these things. There's a tendency to, look at this iPad and say, okay, how do I turn this on and how do I get the functions that I need? And that's one side of your brain, but, taking a creative approach is like, okay, what kind of glass is on the lens and what does it smell like? And what happens if I press this button instead of that? And if I throw it against the wall, does it still work? Like you will try every possible use of this device that may then reveal things about it being possible that you never thought existed. And I think the same thing happens when you're doing advocacy work. You never really know until you turn over every stone. And for some people, that can be very frustrating because they want to see it, right now. But ultimately, had we not gone through that and had those big failures, we wouldn't have learned the lessons and figured out, okay, this is what we were really trying to get at all along. I hope that's not too abstract.
That's some really great discussion, guys. Next, I'd like to ask you a question. I think, Ariana, you'll really be receptive to this one because you did draw upon it in your presentation. But what kind of platforms have served you well in your work as a health advocate? And that could be something like social media, for instance.
Yeah, like I said, social media on my presentation is a really good one, but it's also a very difficult one to do well because there's so many organizations competing for your attention, and like what makes you stand out? What do you offer that not other organizations offer? And most ways social media do it is like human connection, like help opening stands on like in malls and promoting there, or going to schools and talking to kids. And another platform, if you could say that, is just like talking to like people in day to day, because it doesn't always have to be in such a formal setting and like you have all your points listed, so you need to make these points right now and like kind of flow with it, if that makes sense. Yeah.
I'm not great at social media. In fact, I tried to send to Twitter the other day and I think Elon Musk blocked me out, which maybe is a point of pride. I don't know.
That's a success, Gary. That means you've
It
done
is a
it.
success. No, it totally is. I need a button. Platforms is kind of I'm not even sure quite how to interpret the idea of platform. I think it's a bit of a leading statement or concept in some ways. I'm going to speak to good old-fashioned relationships as being sort of really at the center of effective advocacy. And what I mean by relationships is sort of building out connections, both with, for me, I don't see myself as a person with lived experience in most of the things that I do advocacy around. It's building connections deeply within communities and using those connections to sort of figure out how I will support advocacy being done in those communities and what community needs are. And then also building connections with those who have some ability to kind of shape systems, shape policy, to make change in sort of more official spaces. And figuring out how to open those doors, which, again, as a person with privilege, like personal and professional privilege, those doors have opened for me in ways that may be easier than some, but I think that is maybe one of the pieces that I can help contribute to advocacy and being careful around how to sort of navigate those pathways to help leverage relationships to sort of effectively move towards change. I don't know how effective it's been for me a lot of the time. I mean, I've done enough work with people in government to know that most of the time it just sort of disappears into a black hole, but occasionally things emerge and I'm like, okay, I think something was heard, and I think it was probably heard because we built up some modicum of respect between us in our relationship.
I think there's an element of really getting to know I don't really necessarily like to use the word stakeholder, but just getting to know, meet everyone that you're working with along the way where they're at, and finding a way to communicate these issues in a way that will make sense to them or that will connect with them. For example, when we were opening the first supervised consumption site in Canada, I mean, this was 20 plus years ago. I'm older than I look. People of color in Punjabi, one privilege we do have is we age very gracefully. So, but when we were doing the advocacy and the outreach to kind of sell people on this concept of harm reduction and a supervised consumption site, we were met with a lot of opposition. And you kind of had to figure out, okay, what argument do I need to take here? I can't just keep saying in this situation that, people who use drugs are people too, and everyone deserves access to, healthcare and food and all these things. Some were not hearing that. So you had to take then the standpoint of take the cost of long-term hospital stays for X number of people over X number of time. Those are your tax dollars. Compare that to the cost of rent for a space and a few clean syringes. That's money in your pocket. I hated the fact that I had to take that line. However, for many people, they said, oh, so opening a consumption site is going to save me money? I'm in. We can work on the morality and like the bigger issues on it, but whatever opens that door to get you in the door, okay, we got you. Then let's keep the dialogue going. So it's, again, that's a lot of just recognizing, okay, you're speaking to this city councilor, they come from a real estate background. How can we communicate this in a way that's going to speak to their interests or things that they understand?
This has been a really stimulating discussion for our panelists. Thank you very much. You've actually addressed a few of the questions we had lined up to do with developing trust with stakeholders and overcoming barriers as they present themselves. So something else I'd like us to kind of touch on is really something I think a lot of members of our audience will be interested in, which is, if you're new to advocacy in whatever shape or form that might be, what would you say are the first couple of steps you should take to manage that and be a good advocate?
I'll just jump in very quickly right away. I think one thing is to acknowledge that you don't have to be all things. We feel this pressure to be like, you have to be able to knock on the doors and do the stats and deal with media. And it's like, if you're not good at stats, there's someone out there who is. Find that person. Bring them onto your team. Try the stats, because you might find that you actually really like them, or at least you can appreciate what has to go into that. So when you make a request of your colleague that does it, you're not making some ridiculous request that's not possible. If there's something that you're really good at, follow that and turn that into your asset, and then build up the team around you. So I think you have to recognize, in many cases doing advocacy, that you're not alone. The fact that this issue matters to you and has affected your life, it probably matters to a whole lot of other people as well. And it's okay to work in teams and to rely on other people. Just have regular checkpoints where you're ensuring that you're on the same page with how you're approaching things. But yeah, you don't have to be everything. And I know as health promoters, we're often doing all kinds of different tasks and working on such a slew of projects. I usually have, 45 things on my portfolio at once. But my role in those is different. And sometimes it's a more passive role. It's very behind the scenes. Sometimes it's, out there being the voice of it all. Make it fun. Focus on the things that really are your strengths, and follow those passions. And there's always somebody out there who's doing the things that you think you don't know how to.
Yeah, and adding on that, I think it's when I started like advocacy journey, I was on social media and I always saw like these accounts with like hundreds of thousands of followers, and like they were putting so much impact on the world. And it's like, I want to do that, but like that scale is kind of, very intimidating to have. And I thought like if I wasn't all in, then like I wasn't being a good advocate. So I think like over years learning that just because I don't do the biggest and like things you can see, and it doesn't mean like you're a bad advocate. It just means like you have it in different ways, in different forms, and it doesn't mean anything that there's something wrong. And another thing I think is really important is your emotions can control a lot of you, and it's really important to not say stuff in vain and have very logical and explanational thoughts, because that's how you're going to be the most effective. If you call someone like a bad name, you're not going to get to their mind, and it's like they're going to be very offensive and on the defense and trying to attack you back, and like you guys will not come to a conclusion. And I think that's what the point of advocacy is, to find a conclusion, a middle ground where you guys can both fight for the same thing or even different things and still be friends at the end of the day.
There are some approaches to doing this work, because it is really emotional. We're talking about things that really, really matter and that are our life and death. You have to avoid the tendency of making this like your personal crusade and taking on the suffering of your entire community, and making it as your own, because that can often turn into, again, spewing out venom on Twitter and things like that at public representatives or other organizations. And that's a really good way to burn bridges and prevent the issues from happening. And then years go by and you wonder, why are we getting anywhere? Well, it's, the common thread in all those sometimes can be the approach that you're taking. And that's really hard, but I think that's where it's important to have balance in your life. Being an activist also means taking care of yourself first, and, maybe go out for a run and come back before you send that email, because you'll be a little more clear-headed about what you're actually saying. It's okay to sit there and swear at your desk. Just, just don't say that in the voicemail that you leave for the city councilor or something.
Yeah, I saw someone posted the 24-hour rule there, which I think is a great rule to follow. Yeah, and I'll just say, like, to anyone starting, I mean, the number one thing I think I would say is look for community, right? Look for others doing this work. Look for mentors. Look for people that you can kind of imagine, you don't have to be exactly like them, but that you can sort of imagine yourself wanting to do some of the things they do, or construct your advocacy or professional life in the way that they do. I think just to sort of give a vision, like a realistic vision into what a future around this looks like. Advocacy should be, like, in a weird way, fun, right? And maybe it's not weird, right? It should, I mean, fun in the sense of like working with others, again, being creative. Like, it's exciting to be sort of like out there constructing change, right? That's really fun and exciting. And one thing that I've noticed, and maybe this is a little bit too simplistic, but I'm going to sort of throw it out there as a thought anyway, is like, the more I've sort of centered my advocacy communities within communities of people with lived experience, as opposed to within communities of kind of, you know, people who are more sort of quote unquote professional advocates without that lived experience, the more I've seen sort of laughter and fun in the spaces that I'm in, right? The more there's an ability to kind of step outside and just, you know, just see the humor in what's going on, you know, and in the people around us, you know. And maybe that's a good way to avoid throwing names at people, because you can just kind of laugh at them, you know, and then you don't have to fight them so like directly in that way, right? And with each other, and sort of know that you have strength in your group, in your community.
If I can't dance, I don't want to be part of your revolution, right?
Okay, so I hate to interrupt the discussion, but I just want to make sure we have some time for Q&A questions. And thank you to our audience for posting so many questions for us. We'll get through as many as we can. So if you do have a question at the last minute, though, again, you can post in the Q&A function and we'll see if we have time for it. So the first question I want to give to our panelists today is, and anyone can jump onto this one, is how best can a health promotion specialist influence policy without being directly involved in advocacy work due to work implications?
This is a good one. And the challenge is, like my position, for example, and this is public knowledge because you can just look it up on the website. It's funded through the Ministry of Health. So how do I, which is where a lot of the change that I'm fighting for constantly rests. How do I do this while keeping good relations with my organization, not risking, you know, revenge in the terms of our funding being cut, which, you know, happens. But so much of the work, I almost see it as is really behind the scenes. The example that I gave, you know, kind of had me on the front page of the, you know, CBC and stuff, but that's actually the very extreme minority. And that situation was only because they made the request at 3:30 and had to have it done by 5 o'clock. And I was the one that was available. So I just went and did it. You can do a lot of work behind the scenes to help build the capacity, do the training, you know, do the, like, this is how you give a deputation. Like, ultimately, this should be coming from, you know, the communities that you're working with. And that requires some egolessness and stepping aside again and not making it your personal issue, even if it does, you know, affect you personally. Sometimes it's better heard from someone who's directly a member of the community. But you can still do a lot, you know, and kind of never be seen. And that counts. And that really, really counts.
Hey, excellent response, Rob. And that's a tricky question. I want to make sure we get through as many as possible. And I have a question actually for Ariana. Ariana, how do you think we can engage more youth and young adults into advocacy and community development work?
Yeah, from experience, I know some people can be like very condescending, so that turns a lot of people off from it, and like talking down, saying like they don't understand or they don't know what they're talking about. So talking to them just as like a normal human being and just making them feel welcome. And I also think targeting like young, very like going into high school, because that's like a new time to learn who you are and new opportunities, so that can get people really engaged. It's also important to know who is more likely to be a part of any like organization, and going to like universities and you go into humanities, they're going to be more likely than like STEM majors, obviously. So it's important to know who your demographic is, and just again, just being very kind and heartwarming and very natural with how things progress, because a lot of people can sense like if they're being trying to be forced into stuff. So it's just nice to have that human connection.
Excellent stuff, Ariana, and you really, I think, have inspired a lot of us with your work. Gary, I want to give you a chance to tell us some stuff about your work. And we do have a good question here for you. You mentioned the need for health professionals to fortify relationships with existing community advocates, but that takes time. What strategies may be used to expedite this process?
It's interesting. I mean, there's a bit of a contradiction in the question, right? Because I mean, it takes time, right? I don't know if you can truly expedite that process. I think that, sure, I mean, you can go to community meetings, put yourself out there as a professional, you know, to show that you are willing to meet with people within communities and willing to, you know, just show up and be present and be around and have your face known. You know, and show that you're willing to sort of break down some of the sort of perceived walls around professionals and just sort of step into community spaces. But the reality is relationships are relationships, right? And those relationships, they can start quite quickly, but they build depth slowly. And I think you just have to accept that that is going to happen over time, and you need to just be committed to coming back and to talking and listening and being around and coming out when people ask you to come out, and working through issues people ask you to work through. I don't know if you can truly expedite that process, and I know that's really hard to hear, you know, especially for people who haven't started building those relationships, but it does come. You know, it does come with just commitment and time and involvement. And it develops just in layers, you know, and it's quite a beautiful process of development, and just enjoy that process.
Just to quickly add something to that, Gary, it's kind of like if sometimes rushing things can blow up and send you more steps back than if you just kind of took the time to let it be what it needed to be.
Yeah, a really quick example. I mean, about 5 years ago, I said no project that was supposed to take 2 years around, you know, figuring out how to convince the healthcare community to deal with social issues routinely. And as part of this project, I pulled together a group of lived experience experts. And, you know, the project was supposed to take 2 years, right? And, you know, I went through the 2 years. They happened very, very quickly. And luckily, actually, the pandemic happened, right? And there was a pause. And then we came back after about 2 years of a pandemic break. And we'd been sort of speaking on and off through this time, like just kind of casually. But in seeing each other again, and in me seeing this group of people with like very powerful, deep histories and deep experiences, you know, there was just kind of a sense of relaxation stepping into that room, that I think people knew that we weren't working towards a short timeline, that we had allowed a more organic timeline to set in, an excitement to see each other, and just a depth of conversation emerged that just hadn't been possible in the rushed space of that initial project. Right. And I can tell you that what happened in that space subsequently was revolutionary, just from a learning perspective for me, because of just the depth of experience that was able to come out, and the time that had passed allowing that to build. I mean, it's like growing a garden, you know, you got to let it grow.
Great stuff. All right. Next, I would like to ask a question, and anyone can jump onto this one. Has anyone had experiences with collaborations that ran out of funds and did not prepare for sustainability? If so, what did you do?
The interesting thing, if there's anyone in this webinar who, is involved in allocating funds in their organization or who makes those kinds of decisions, I've always seen health promotion as a huge bang for the buck investment. The example that I gave about the St. Jamestown initiative, the only funding involved in that was just salaries. Like the return on investment was huge. That whole initiative pretty much cost nothing. A lot of what we do, or at least my experience with doing health promotions, is taking a lay of the land and seeing, okay, who's out there doing what, and are we both kind of, using our resources to do the exact same thing? And if not, okay, or if we are, then let's work together. You can do this part, I'll do this part. So I haven't really, run into, there's been branches of the tree that have run out because of funding, but then the hope was that, like, for example, one thing in St. Jamestown, because of the work that we did on the initiative that I gave, the city then identified St. Jamestown as a key community to establish a centralized food security hub in the city, which would be the first of its kind. And that was entirely based on the work that we did. So the consultation process with the city went on for, about a year, and there was a lot of inventory taking and asset management and consultations. And that ran out. However, it set the stage for then the next phase of that, which was to actually build the hub. And we were able to get buy-in from Toronto Community Housing to do that. So I think a lot of it is just creatively, as we got back to in the beginning, just making the best of the resources that you have, and maybe finding resources that you didn't think were resources initially, and working them in. So yeah, I mean, it's a perpetual state of working without funding and making it work for you. I'm not sure if that really answers the question, but yeah, huge return on investment if we're talking about dollars for organizations.
I was just saying, I sort of laughed at the question because I was like, I so rarely get funding for this type of work that it's just kind of, the sustainability is because people just keep doing it, right? But yeah, I mean, just to echo a little bit, I mean, a lot of my strategy around these things is to have many different initiatives sort of, targeted kind of towards the same thing and going on simultaneously. Sort of, if one does die out, there's sort of others coming from different angles, right? And for me in my world, that's often having like some policy work and some research and some education curriculum development and some kind of frontline program development within our health team, and it's all sort of focused on similar areas. And I've had organizations pull back funding for, like, we had a poverty and health committee in a provincial health organization a number of years ago, and it just kind of they stopped funding it, just sort of died out. But by the time they stopped funding it, we'd already been doing so much of the work through other avenues anyways that we hardly noticed at that point. So
and the other thing with I hope this doesn't sound too just naive, but it's like the money's always there. You just have to inspire the will for it to be allocated. When, I hope this isn't too contentious an example, but when the province of Ontario was looking to cut Toronto's ward system down from 47 to 25, they were there at Queen's Park Sunday night until midnight, just pushing it to get it through because they really wanted to do that. I mean, that was harmful, I would say, if I were to say that. However, you can inspire that kind of passion, and the money will be there. It's always there if the people making the allocations can be convinced of its importance. And I've seen examples of that. So I'm not just, pie in the skying it here.
I agree. And just as a note of hope, like I have never seen as much funding being offered up for sort of equity-oriented, health promotion-oriented initiatives as right now, right? In sort of 20 years of being in this profession. So it's a good time, like from private foundations and donors, and even to government, right? Even in this environment that we're in right now in Ontario, there's money coming in. COVID has been a game changer in this area.
And
Yes,
looking at
hope-
resources and outside of the box, I mean, social capital is such a powerful thing. I remember for 20 years, I was talking about this Robert Putnam book called Bowling Alone, and it's about, you know, as use the example of bowling leagues, but as they started to dwindle across the United States, you had this greater sense of alienation, and then school shootings kind of correlated with that. It's where Michael Moore got the title for Bowling for Columbine from. And I was always talking about social capital. Like when I worked in the downtown east side Vancouver, the money wasn't there. However, I could walk 2 blocks in either direction, hand out a few leaflets, and in an hour I'd have 200 people ready to go. That is currency. And a few years ago, the city of Toronto did a social capital study, citing Putnam on the first page, and rated all the different neighborhoods for what their level of social capital. And I was saying, see, I wasn't just yelling into the clouds all these years. This is a real thing. And St. Jamestown ranked very high in that. I think they were second after communities like Parkdale and such. So that becomes leverage. And now that this exists in a city that was a study that was funded by or commissioned by the city, well, then you can use that in your funding applications. Hey, this is coming from a community that has a very high social capital score, according to your calculation. So again, turning these things into assets and trying to find them in places that you may not obviously think that they would be.
We got some really great discussion from that question. And thank you very much, Gary and Rob, for that. I want to get Ariana back in the discussion as well. And Ariana, we have a bunch of really good questions for you. I also know we have a lot of students in our audience today, and so maybe they can get a bit of perspective from you on this. So what are some of the advocacy skills you have been able to develop or improve due to your experience with Waihu?
I think the biggest one is collaboration, because like we're usually from my experience, we're by ourselves doing our own thing. So learning to work with a group, and even if we have like not the same ideas, we can still work to an agreement by talking out together, or just like bonding over a project we're doing. So I think that's a very important one, and just learning that, like they said before, it's not all about you. So just like it's okay to take a step back and let other people do the work, because you're not the center of the universe, even though we like to think so. So that's a very good thing that I learned the hard way. So yeah.
Oh, excellent stuff. And Gary, here's a great question for you as well. I'm just going to kind of run through a few of these questions now. We have about 7 or so minutes. Gary, do you have any recommendations for engaging healthcare providers in advocacy work? I find they are often so passionate, but far too busy.
I mean, look, not every health provider is going to be involved in advocacy work, but I mean, this has been the sort of a central question for me throughout my career, is sort of how do we get more involved, right? And I mean, it started back in that poverty campaign I talked about, where we got like 80 people, 80 providers out to be involved, which I thought was amazing, until I realized that, you know what, there's like tens of thousands of providers in this province that, and if we can mobilize that force, like that will be a real force for change. And so I sort of point to, or I sort of use a couple of main avenues with the healthcare world. So one of them is just to kind of go back to evidence. I think evidence, you know, sort of drawing on those professional currents in people's brains, right, where they're trained to respond to evidence-based arguments. I spend less time doing that now because I think people know that evidence better than they did a number of years ago, but still do draw on that. And the other piece is to kind of is to really draw on stories, right, and sort of remind providers over and over again that in their jobs they're what they're really doing is listening to real people's real life stories, right? And if we truly take the time to listen to those stories, they tell us over and over again, they tell us that we need to look to social and structural changes if we want to really affect change that will improve the health of our clients in the healthcare world. And I think that piece is also resonates very, very well with health providers. And so I've kind of incorporated that more and more into my efforts in the healthcare world. And sorry, the last thing I'll say is and this is something I'm working on more now, is really working to build communities of kind of advocacy oriented providers. And because I find there's a lot of people who really care about this stuff, but they often feel like they're just alone doing it. They don't know that there's like someone a block or 2 blocks or a town over who's incredibly like-minded, and be very excited to work with them on some of this. So, I've been working on a new kind of web-based network that I'm hoping will help people to kind of find each other. It's a bit experimental at this point, but it kind of draws on what I've heard from people over and over again, that they really do feel isolated around this. And I don't think they need to, right? I think that they have colleagues and acquaintances who feel very similar and would be very happy to join forces and join energies around this. So just a few ideas.
Really great ideas too, Gary. Thank you for sharing that. So we're down to our last 4 minutes, and I have a question lined up here that really gets to the heart of this webinar series, which is health promotion moving into the future. And so I'd like to just get each of your perspectives, if possible, on this one. During your career, how has your approach to advocacy changed? How do you anticipate it changing in the future? And I don't know, Rob, if you'd like to go first here, or whomever would like to go first.
When I started my current position in health promotion, there's only 2 of us in our organization. We're an organization of 600 people. So again, getting to the return on investment thing, just having 2 staff, it's amazing what can get done. And in my first week, I spoke to my colleague, Leslie, who's been doing it for 35 years. And I said to her, well, she said to me, actually, every day now is just as challenging and exciting and inspiring as it was when I first started. And, for me, about 8 years into this current journey in health promotions, I can see exactly what she means. It's a constant process of adapting and growing and sharing. Some colleagues of mine were working on a nationwide needs assessment into supporting community members experiencing suicidality, and they wanted to strike an Indigenous sub working group. And I said, are you going to give everyone gifts of tobacco to do the consultation? And they're like, no, we hadn't actually thought of that. So then it was like, okay, now that seed's planted. And then they went out and did the research, figured out what they needed to do, what's the way to give it, how do you package it. So now that's embedded into their process, and it wasn't there before. So I think it's just constantly a process of learning and growing, and I have no idea where we're headed, but it's just going to be a matter of staying adapted to that and keep changing, keep growing, it's okay to acknowledge if you made mistakes in the past. That's because that's how we grow.
Ariana, do you want to take a shot?
Yeah, and I don't have much experience. Oh, sorry. Do you want to go? Oh, okay. So I don't have that much experience in like knowing what advocacy was before, but I can have a fair guess on where it's going to in the future, because from my experience, I can see a lot more people are getting involved with social issues and really educating themselves on like what's not only going around locally in the world, but also on like a national scale. So I can see like a lot more people are gonna go out into the streets and protest what they're passionate about, and also just like showing up in the polls and voting. And also, like I said before, social media. So all these things and get youth really involved with what type of world they're going to inherit, and that's a very important thing in my opinion.
And I'll just offer, I know we're out of time, but I'll just I think what I'll say is that like what I've seen more and more, what I've had to grapple with more and more over time is the need to tackle issues from a more and more complex understanding of what those issues involve. And this is you know, and we can look like to the rise of like theories like intersectionality and critical race theory, and you know, these ideas that bring in far more complex analyses than if you want to go to like, you know, where I started, which was like, well, you raise social assistance rates, you'll end poverty. It's like you give a bit of money and poverty's done, right? It's like we've had to move so much deeper and so far beyond that. And you know, who reminds me of that more than anyone are the students that I come across, right? And I see that actually increasingly in medical students that sort of pass through my world, is that they're coming in very well versed in complex theories of social change and social and understandings of the complexities of social inequities. And this is something that I've really had to work to catch up to, right? And I think that really the way forward is going to involve or effective advocacy moving forward is going to have to involve an ability to sit with that complexity and work from a deep and complex understanding. And I think that will help. I think it is a more realistic understanding of the worlds we are working to shift and to change.
Awesome stuff, everyone. Well, looking at the clock, unfortunately, it is almost 1 o'clock now. And so I'll have to wrap up our discussion. Thank you very much to each of our panelists for these amazing presentations and thoughtful discussions. Thank you as well to all of our participants in the audience for joining today, and we really hope you enjoyed this year's webinar series. Now, your feedback is highly valued, and we would love to hear from you in the post-session evaluation, which is shared in the chat, and it should also appear as a prompt when you exit the Zoom call. We also encourage you to stay connected with Health Promotion Ontario on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter. And don't forget to register to get exclusive member benefits. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to our team. And everyone, have a lovely day. Thank you very much.